Welcome to Mad Men Men, where we gather in the creative lounge to discuss and analyze each episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which aired between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of the show. Another of us went through it just once, back when it was airing. And then there's me, the cure for the common podcast co-host. I'm John Agroni, and Will Ashton, why are you taking your clothes off? Are you trying to make another point?
Well, I feel like we've had some hostile conversations over the years, and things have gotten a little testy. So I thought, if we all go a natural, maybe this episode will go a little bit smoother.
And everyone, look, it's Mike Overholtz. Go ahead and clap. Mike, I think you should win an award for waxes, because you always wax poetic.
On a personal note, it pains me to hear that, John, because I've grown quite fond of you.
What a liar. Lane's a lion Lane. He lies all throughout this episode. When they're like, oh, Peyton Place, I can't believe it. He's like, it is a surprise. I agree. No, you don't.
I gotta say, Mike's lane is pretty good. I gotta commend that. Yeah. John's lane was a so-so.
Well, I can't. Yeah, hard act to follow. I'm not the one winning awards. But yes, welcome everyone to Mad Men Men, back for another round. And, Mike, we missed you for Chrysanthemum and the Sword. I'm guessing you did get a chance to watch it at a certain point. And I guess just real quick, did you like that episode? I mean, if you want to sum it up.
Yeah, I would say I'm generally a fan of that episode. But that's just because I'm also just generally a fan of everything that Mad Men is doing in this particular era of Mad Men.
That tracks.
But it just gets, I feel like, just better and better. I will say I definitely like this episode a lot more. This episode gives you everything. Like, you have flashbacks, a drunk Dawn, a drunk
lots
everyone,
of locations.
Really. Yeah, this is a great episode.
Yeah, I think this episode, the one before it, and then the one coming up next, I mean, it's its own trilogy, I guess. But yes, we're talking about Waldorf Stories this week. So this is the 6th episode of the 4th season. It's the 45th episode of the entire series. It was written by Brett Johnson. He was on the commentaries with Matthew Weiner, and it was directed by Scott Hornbacher, who's done a bunch of episodes at this point. I'll have to do a quick search because I forget the last episode he did. I want to say it was Wee Small Hours, but
yeah, it was.
The
only thing that he had directed prior to this. He was a producer on the show.
That's right.
But
Scott gets mentioned quite a bit in the commentaries because, yeah, he's definitely a mainstay. And yeah, and Matthew Weiner, of course, co-wrote this episode as well. I think this is Brett Johnson's first episode writing, if I'm not mistaken. I hadn't heard him on the commentaries before, but he was very interesting as a writer and in the commentaries themselves. Now, Will, you are our first time watcher, and so you got to kind of learn some new little tidbits. We get some, like, as Mike said, some flashbacks. We go to the 50s. And I think the thing that you texted us is we get Drunk Dawn, one of the most iconic, memeable Dawn frames in this episode happens. Will, what's your response to that?
Oh, I was very excited. I have to say, I also like this trend that started, I believe, last season. Maybe there are episodes season 1 and 2 that I'm forgetting at the moment, but I like this trend where everyone gets drunk and bad things happen. Like with last season, it was the one with the lawnmower where the guy lost his foot. Like, everyone's just kind of partying, and then something bad happens. Dawn drinks too much and then, plagiarizes and does a bunch of naughty things. I think it's a fun trend. And for as thematically dense as this episode is, and honoring all the kind of Mad Men ways of talking about control and generation changes, and this idea of maintaining either the actual power of industry or the illusion of power or what have you. It's also just a really funny episode. It's just fun to, like, kind of hang out with these guys as they're going through a bender, until it's not fun, obviously. Like, Dawn is probably, I don't want to say it's the most drunk we've seen Dawn, but certainly the most, I guess, neglectful John
it's
has
close.
been.
Yeah, I think the Christmas party is the only one that kind of rivals it.
Sure. But yeah, and that was also a season as well. So
yeah,
this season really is showing Drunk Dawn at his most debauched and dangerous at the moment, which doesn't suggest a particularly funny episode, but it is very funny throughout. And the Drunk Dawn pitch was a lot of fun. it was actually a better pitch than I expected, considering that the meme, like the basis of it is usually like, like a company has like the most ridiculous idea ever, and people do that where it's like, like Pop-Tarts you put in your pants or something like ridiculous or whatever. And so like, yeah, I thought it was fun to finally see that. I mean, I would say that's probably the most famous Mad Men meme. I would have.
It's one of them.
Other than
might be. It is because there's a I Don't Think About You at All is pretty famous too, right?
I would say that one's still upcoming, and then there's one in the next episode that's also a pretty famous meme. But yeah, I mean, it's good to see it finally.
Well, say it like that, but you haven't seen the next episode. We have to make clear, unless you did at a college party in 2019.
Haven't seen it, but I know it's a very famous episode.
Did you also find it to be pretty funny, Mike?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this episode's hilarious. Like when they do like the literal victory lap. I don't know. There's something about it that's like so
Jimmy
old
Olsen.
school funny to it. Yeah, exactly. It's so ridiculous. And then I even like the interview, like the opening scene interview, I found really fun. Just I don't know.
Roger Sterling. You know him, right?
Did you see me shake his hand when I walked in?
So what does he start? 5:30. Yeah, Matthew Weiner said that's John Hamm like laughing for real.
Oh, really?
Oh, well, he said that it's like that plus like Don. I think that's like genuine like Don laughing. Like he's not putting it on.
I think the funniest moment of that scene is just when they usher him out the door and he's like asking for restaurants. And what's the name of the super old secretary?
Ida Blankenship, the mom from Karate Kid.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just like she'll give you a recommendation, and as soon as the door closes, you hear like, "I don't work for you."
Yeah. So what are the other commentary for this one? We didn't get two commentaries for Chrysanthemum and the Sword, but we did for Waldorf Stories. The second one was really fun because we had, first of all, Aaron Staton, who plays Ken Cosgrove, and Will's prediction not too long, I think last season, that Ken Cosgrove would be coming back just based on how much Mike and I have fondness for him. He's in the commentary along with the two new characters in this episode. So Jay Ferguson, who plays Stan Rizzo, the new art director, who gets dominated by Peggy, but not in a, I guess, I don't want to say overtly sexual way, because I guess it kind of is.
Doesn't get pegged, but he does get
there it is,
the peg treatment.
Yeah, he gets exposed. And then Danny Strong, a well-known screenwriter, well-known at that time for The Recount. And also, he was also an actor too at certain times, but Danny Strong was on the commentary as well. And when they were chatting, because this was the first episode with both Stan and Danny, Danny Strong plays a character in the show also named Danny's, just so we don't get it confused. But apparently Jay Ferguson had never seen the show before when he auditioned for Stan. And he didn't really have a sense of like what the show was. Remember, this is 2010. It was AMC. Like it had only been out for a couple of years at this point. And he, after reading the script, thought this show was a comedy. So he was like trying to say that. And Danny Strong is like the flip side, where he's like obsessed with Mad Men. He had hung out with Matthew Weiner like a couple times during like an award circuit thing. And Weiner basically kind of like in this episode brought him in like, oh, you should audition whenever I have something for you. And so Danny was like having this really like starstruck moment of being in the show. And it's actually a really fun commentary because Danny Strong talks a lot about what it was like being a big fan of the show. And he's like, it's so weird because you're like, I feel like I was stepping into like, virtual reality. Like I'm in some kind of like fictional world. And it's like, why am I talking to Don? Why am I talking to Peggy? But he says, Jay Ferguson says, he's like, I thought like, isn't this supposed to be like a drama? Like he's reading the script. He's like, this is hilarious. And so there you go.
I wonder if that like even helps that portrayal that Danny has of like wanting to be in the big leagues or like wants to be there and like is in general awe of what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he says it at the end when he shakes Don's hand and he's like, when I'm smiling there, like I'm smiling for real because like I get to be in the show now, like for more episodes. It's great. So Will, I do have to ask because there's a lot of stuff to cover in this episode. There are a lot of overlapping storylines. There is the Pete stuff with Ken Cosgrove. There is Peggy and Stan. There is a little bit of, Lane gets a little bit of play here with Pete. And of course, we have like the Don stuff. We also have the Roger stuff narrating his book, which thank God that's finally arrived. I can't wait to get it in the mail. But besides the Dawn storyline, because I think that's the obvious kind of like the current, what would you want to touch on first that kind of stood out to you?
As per usual, I think just because she's kind of the heart of the show, I think I want to talk about Peggy first. I mean, I think her whole thing in this episode is very Peggy-esque, but it does feel like a proper evolution for a character, because we've seen her, like a lot of the women in the show, kind of be undermined or underappreciated or kind of belittled. But this time around, she really kind of, steps up for herself in a big way. Not only with the guy that she, what's the guy we just meet this time around?
Stan. So his name is Stan Rizzo. We get introduced to him through a real ad that played during the Goldwater versus Johnson presidential campaign, with showing like the KKK and stuff like that. And that was a real ad that I think was DDB put together, but they don't know who actually made it, and they try to find out. But the whole point of that scene was that they wanted to show that Stan, as Matthew Weiner put it, had the goods. But there is an ambiguity to, is he actually talented? Because he could just be taking credit for the ad when, it kind of connects with, like, Danny writes the cure for the common breakfast. And it's like, it's weird for like this stuff, how this stuff kind of like, who owns an idea? That's a very advertising thing. But yeah, Stan is the guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And not only with that though, but I think the way she really steps up to Dawn and like becomes the authoritative voice for this mentor or former mentor figure is really inspiring for her sake. I mean,
he's treating her like shit.
Well, sure, but at least she's like, she has more of a backbone and is like not taking gruff as much as especially because this whole episode she's constantly like talked down to, or
they won't let her go to the awards,
and not taking to the awards. Even Pete's kind of like pushing her aside as if like her concerns are irrelevant. It's obviously, like I said, this whole episode deals with the idea of control, or maybe even the illusion of control. But in an episode where a lot of the characters kind of find themselves humbled, or in a place where they find themselves like not as authoritative as they once thought, it's refreshing at least to see Peggy kind of assert herself more in this episode, and hopefully show what's to come in the seasons to follow.
I want to get Mike, your reaction to this. So this is something Keith Phillips wrote about the show back when this episode came out in AV Club, back when AV Club was, readable. And sorry, I'm taking shots, but so he said this about Peggy: I'm not sure I know who Peggy is anymore. I don't mean that as a criticism. I don't think Peggy knows who Peggy is anymore. And that's part of what makes her character so interesting, and for the last couple of seasons, at least, fun. She has removed herself, at least for now, from the shackles of the morality she grew up following, but it's not like she's turned hedonist either. And then he says, Peggy's asserting herself now, even with Dawn, and the more she asserts herself, the harder Dawn pushes back. Yeah, I mean, do you agree with that? Like, does Peggy know who she is at this point? Because I think I agree with this, but I'm kind of curious if you do.
Yeah, I also think I tend to agree, because I think what's so great about this episode particularly as well is like the narrative framing of that first initial interview, and Peggy saying like, it's nice to look back like on my own work and see how far I've come. And I think that kind of then is the rest of the episode, right? You get the flashbacks of Dawn, you get the flashbacks of Joan and Roger, and you're seeing all these characters kind of think back to where they used to be and see where they are now. And it's like they're all kind of just filling the same mold of maybe who they did or didn't want to become, but it's definitely like the path that they were always on. Whereas Peggy, you look at her, and I think although she doesn't know who she is, she's at least like actually reflective and thinking about it, and trying to create her own path rather than just being, I don't know, handed the deck that the current world of the 60s would hand her. Because she's part of that younger generation that the show's been talking about this entire time, who revolutionizes, who has new thoughts and new feelings, whereas you're seeing that juxtaposed with everyone else who just, went through what they were supposed to do in the 50s. They made their big break, and now look at them. They're the drunks winning awards, stealing other people's ideas, in divorced marriages.
Yeah, I think that is one of the main things that separates Mad Men from a lot of other shows that are workplace dramas like this, where a character like Peggy could so easily be less multidimensional in the sense that she would be 100% ambitious, 100% always pushing back against Dawn, always trying to like, second wave feminist this thing, like girl boss it.
I was just gonna say girl boss.
Right. But she's not, because she picks her battles, and she's very nuanced in how she navigates this in a way that's believable. And it rings true with experiences that people will have. Like, obviously we wouldn't have in the exact way because we're not women, but we would in the sense of like feeling like your boss is taking advantage of you, not hearing you out. And of course, that's exacerbated further if you're a woman in the 60s and you're, as she says, 25. Right. Weiner says this whole episode is about kind of trying to like find success in the workplace, and how you like kind of have to, because of how exploitative, the workplace is, let alone advertising, the advertising workplace, you kind of have to sneak in, right? Like the way that Dawn gets in is sneaky, it's not just like a meritocracy, and in some cases, like with Danny, it's of course nepotism, but also like even for him, like as a nepo baby, or not a nepo baby, but like he's only there because he's related to Jane. He's Jane's cousin, but he worms his way in kind of outside of his control because his hacky pitch, accidentally wins as a slogan, basically.
Hey, you got to give him at least credit for not just taking the money and just insisting on wanting the job.
It's a great line. He's like, because when Dawn is just like, you're only here because of Roger or whatever, he's like, yeah, that's all I have. That and my ideas. Like, it's just a very good line. It's like, he's desperate, but he's also like you're saying, he's just not settling. And I think that's, I think the show saying that those are the people that tend to like make it, is when you kind of have to be a bit reptilian almost. But yeah, so Will, I don't know. Is that what the episode is to you about, like making it at work, or was there something else that you found in this?
I mean, that's part of it to some respect, but there is, I don't know, something humorous but also disheartening about the idea of like Dawn is not dissimilar to this person. Like at the beginning of the episode, it's easy to like look at him and be like, he doesn't even really deserve to be in Dawn's presence. But then you see these flashback sequences with Dawn and Roger, and we've heard kind of brief rumblings about like how they met and like how I guess Roger sort of found Dawn. It's sort of glamorized, and
we've gotten bits and pieces. Like in The Wheel, it was kind of mentioned. Betty has mentioned that he worked at a fur company when she met him, and Roger said that I found this guy. He was like going to night school, and stuff like that. Even the Joan thing of like, him dating her for a while before this, although there is a little bit of a continuity thing that sort of annoys me. And then in the commentary, I was waiting for it, and Weiner is just like, oh yeah, they bring it up that, Roger's like, I've had the best year of my life when he's talking to Joan. But this, so in season 1, when we see the reveal that Roger and Joan had an affair and they're in the hotel room, he's like, this has been the best year of my life. And the obvious implication is that this has been going on for a year, when that can't really be the case, because they were apparently having an affair as early as like the 50s, when like much earlier in the show, when Dawn wasn't even working there yet. Right. And Weiner says like, we figured out the timeline, but I think then you kind of have to, it's always irked me. You know what I mean? I'm just like, how do you reconcile that? I guess you have to say that like maybe their affair was off and on, and then they got back together. That's the only way to do it.
I think if I was in their position, I would say they could justify it by not that, just by saying that like they broke it off because they knew it wasn't good, but then like in the past year or so they rekindled their spark or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. Whatever.
I think the show gives you enough evidence that Roger Sterling and Joan would be on again, off again.
Yeah, except in this episode, he kind of goes for it, and as usual, and she strikes him down. Her husband is still in Vietnam, I think, at this point. By the way, I think my favorite visual in this episode is the hand-holding at the award ceremony. It's just so lovely. Weiner said that it's based off of like 80 Billy Wilder movies. And Billy Wilder is just such a great comparison here. I know we've mentioned the show is pretty heavily inspired by, Some Like It Hot and The Apartment, the way that Wilder was just so good at infusing humor into drama and vice versa. But this is one of those episodes where I think it comes through even fiercer than usual.
as far as the awards go, I do think it's really fascinating that in season 1, Dawn didn't really seem to care much about like awards and recognition. Like he had that horseshoe award, and he kind of like was like flippant about it in a way. Like, I mean, it was in his office, but like, you know, it wasn't something that he took excessive pride in. So it was kind of jarring for me to see him like so eager, and like obviously the booze was influencing it to some respect, but like how proud and how like gun ho he is about winning an award and all that stuff. And I was wondering if that was sort of like a commentary on the show being kind of an Emmy darling at that point, and like the idea of like the first season, like, you know, not that they were against the idea of an Emmy, but it was like before they really got like this award recognition, before they were really like, you know, I mean, obviously Weiner was a
they
award
had gotten
darling.
a lot of recognition at this point.
Right. Well, by this point, yeah. But I'm talking like in season 1 when they were kind of flipping about awards. Obviously,
I see
Weiner was, you know, like in The Sopranos, and so like he was like no stranger to like the Emmys, but maybe he was just like kind of, you know, laissez-faire about it in the way that that show kind of is in its like meta commentary about awards. Like there's a character in that show, without giving too much away, that, you know, is really eager to get an Emmy and is kind of worse off for it. But in this setting, I do kind of wonder if that's sort of driving the narrative, the idea of like, because they're getting so much award recognition and that they're kind of becoming these like, you know, like the top dogs in the Emmy circuit, if that is allowing them to kind of be, I don't know, maybe prideful, but also like kind of losing their compass a little bit, maybe like kind of like, yeah,
but almost, I like that a lot, actually. I think that's a really interesting observation, because I think to what you're saying, and I could be spinning it a little bit, but like, it's almost like Weiner, you know, in the first season, like you're saying, is a little bit like, I guess you're saying like flippant about it, because at that point, Weiner himself like hasn't quite, you know, reached that acclaim. He's worked in The Sopranos and everything, but you know, it hasn't been his thing. But at this point, when they're doing season 4, like, yes, like Mad Men has like struck gold and everything, and this is like his way of being like, this is kind of the story of how like what it was like to receive that award and kind of like losing yourself in it and taking it a little too seriously. But you know, to what you're saying, that first season, like another thing is like Don has his foot out the door when it comes to advertising. He says the whole thing to Roger about, you know, if I ever go somewhere else, it's not going to be for advertising. I like the show lets him change and kind of like morph as like his work life becomes more and more intertwined with his personal life and part of his identity, especially in this season when he doesn't have a personal life. He doesn't even see his kids in this episode, as we know. He continues to be like, well, I need some kind of validation. I need something. And this award is apparently like hitting something with him that just isn't being satisfied anywhere else. And I think that that's why the stakes might be higher than ever for him. But that's how I take it.
Yeah, I think the same thing as John there. I mean, this version of Dawn, right, is defined by the guy who gave that interview and was like, I walked in and said fire, right? Like, he has fully leaned into, I am Donald Draper. I'm a big name in advertising, and now I have this award to show for it. I feel like that maybe was like something like the last thing he felt like he was lacking, right? He's had the good pitches, he's landed the big clients, he's come up with good ideas, he started his own agency, it's been mildly successful, but now he has an award, which I feel like to him is like the I'm a bona fide superstar now S type deal.
Yeah, I think so. And he does win the award, and we get a little bit of Duck. I like how, you know, Duck, he has his like drunk tirade there, and I like how Mark Moses, the actor there, he's just such a funny sort of like foreshadow of like, oh yeah, this is where Don could end up, right? Like Don gets pretty drunk in this episode, but he's not quite like at the pathetic level that Duck is, but he better watch out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I was amused, but then instantly kind of saddened to see Duck again. Like, you know, he's just one of those characters who, like, you know, there's obviously a lot of baggage going into it as far as like the first 3 seasons with him. But yeah, now seeing him, like, initially it's like, oh, Duck's back, and then it's like, oh,
Duck's back.
Yeah.
Huh.
He's back on the back off the wagon, I guess I should say. You know, and you know, he gets rid of Chauncey, everything goes south for him. You know,
yeah.
that's like his getting divorced, I guess, is divorcing himself from. Yeah.
He really is the turning point in his life, man. Everything up to that was all roses, right?
Well, besides the divorce and having to, being blackballed in the industry. But yeah, so I forgot to mention this episode aired on August 29th, 2010. And that was coincidentally the night of the Emmys that year. And so Weiner is like, yeah, that wasn't on purpose, but it's kind of funny how that worked out. And ratings wise, this is the lowest rated episode of the season in terms of viewership. So it had a 2.04 million people watching. There was only one other episode that was like around that, and that was episode 4, The Rejected. And then later on, episode 11 also is pretty low. But this is the lowest that the season gets, and then it's going to start perking back up almost consistently. But yeah, I think if are we going to talk about Don and the drunk stuff? Is it time?
Answer one question. Answer two. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Came out the night of the Emmys. 2010. Who wins Best Leading Actor for a Drama, and what wins Best Drama Series?
I'm going to guess it's going to be Breaking Bad, and I'm going to guess it's our guy, Walter White.
Because that was the whole thing, right? Is that like John Hamm didn't win the Emmy until like pretty late on. Like Bryan Cranston was just, even though Mad Men was a more well-regarded show, his performance was the one that kind of took more Emmy gold. Even though, like, I think Mad Men won Best Drama Series, but Bryan Cranston won Best Actor.
Ding, ding, ding. Will is your winner.
Wait, I said the same thing.
Yeah, John said the same thing.
I thought you said that Breaking Bad won, but John Hamm won the award. I thought you
No, I said our guy. I said Walter White.
Run it back.
No, I did. I was saying Breaking Bad, and okay, all right. Well, this will play back, and then people will be like, Mike was too mean.
My wife is bringing me a coffee in, and so
that is
honestly worth listening.
That I don't blame you, actually. But yeah, so we can talk about the Don stuff. I mean, it's been a depressing season, I think, just in general for Don. And Will, you've already kind of talked about it a little bit with like kind of his descent here. I want to mention that I love the transition there where, he's with the girl that, was kind of like hitting on him. And she's like humming the Star Spangled Banner, which she apparently did the jingle for the ad that she won. That was for, I forget what she said. It was like, I don't know, cake toppings. And apparently they did the Star Spangled Banner because it's in public domain. So you're supposed to kind of just like assume that she's doing that because she knows Don would have heard it. But anyway, so we have that transition though. It kind of reminds me of the one from a few episodes ago with when he's in California, where the scene kind of changes and time passes. And I just love that they're kind of flexing that. I think it's a really nice thing. And we have like the whole Lost Weekend thing here. Yeah, it's definitely pretty drunk Don, but we also get Hangover Don. And Hangover Don is pretty awesome. I want to see him do a whole Hangover movie, because he wasn't in the Hangover movies, but he would have fit right in, wouldn't he, with Bradley Coop and the guys.
It does seem like a missed opportunity.
Well,
he's too busy with Bridesmaids.
Well, John Hamm, that's the funny thing about him. I think we've mentioned this before, that like he is a comedic actor in a dramatic actor's body. Like he so wants to do comedy, but people are like, yeah, we like it when you do the serious stuff. But he's like, but I'm silly. I play Fletch. And he's like, no, you're the Don Draper guy.
He is friends with Zach Galifianakis, as it turns out. They're old friends.
Yeah, I mean, he tried. I mean, before the Mad Men was his first like big dramatic role. Like he was trying to make it as a comedic actor, and then he like did this. Like, okay, I'll try it.
This is his first big role in general. Yeah,
sure, but I mean, it was because he was trying to make it as a comedic actor. So the story goes.
Anything like really since though that is like that dramatic, like Top Gun Maverick, I guess, is a more serious
Lucy
role.
in the Sky.
What about that baseball $1 million arm?
That one, what was it? Marigold Prime or something like that?
Budapest or whatever that one is.
But everything I think of him since then that's been like, oh, what a great John Hamm performance, has been him hamming it up a little bit.
Yeah, Baby Driver. He has some fun in Baby Driver. He was pretty serious in Bad Times at the El Royale, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had an accent, so he was hamming it up.
He has a Midwestern accent in that comes out. Weiner mentions that, like, when he's like, let's go, like, he's like, oh, I love it when John Hamm's Midwestern accent kind of comes out in moments like that, which Will, you know, you're more attuned to Midwestern accents than I am these days. I haven't been out there in a while.
I guess so, yeah.
No.
I picked up a little bit of a different accent when he's doing all the quick pitches and Pete tries to stop him and he goes, no, give me a minute or give me a second.
Yeah, give me a second, Pete. Yeah, I got this.
Like that seemed like Dick. That didn't seem like Dick.
Well, I think that's kind of the point, right? Is that like when he's that drunk, he kind of becomes Dick. I mean, that's what happened with
the waitress.
Well, waitress, yeah. But what was her name? Doris?
Doris.
Yeah, I mean, she calls him Dick. So in his like drunk, borderline blackout state, he just reverts back to Dick Wickman, which is pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Gives her his real name, and it's like, oh, you see on his face too. He's just like, oh God, what have I done? Ted Shaw gets his licks in. He's like, continues to be the sweatiest rival. I love that he's not kind of like a nega version of Don, where he's like Don, and but also like imposing or anything. He's just kind of this like, not even slimy. He's just this kind of like, I don't know. He's kind of like Henry almost in some small respects. He's just a little bit of like, he's got something to prove and he kind of overdoes it a little bit.
I think the addition of the army guy that he's with is pretty fascinating because it's like another kind of element of the control thing that's going on, where he was obviously like a former general, but now he's like a corporate mascot, but he like still kind of wants that authority that comes with being, like an army general. Like when he's talking to Roger, like he doesn't take up with his like snide remarks because like he was like an army general, but like Don said that he was like doing something with like a parrot or something at one point for some corporate thing.
He's not, right? He's an actor.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. So I don't think he was ever a general. I think the idea is that they just hire him because and he's been in commercials and stuff, and that makes the scene even funnier when you watch it too, because he's just like, where I got these medals for shutting up bullies like you or whatever. It's like, all right, dude.
Talking to two actual veterans too, which is like the funnier part about it.
Yeah. And who knows?
Let's save some time. It's that guy.
Well, who knows too? Because he might have been in the army as well, just not a general. Like he's the right age to have been in World War II.
That's what I thought. But I like the idea that Mike
probably not a general though.
But I like the idea that Mike proposed that is the origins of the general.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the scene or the end of the episode, you see him walking outside, and there's
dejected in the rain,
and there's a small black child that comes up to him, and he's bouncing a basketball, and the kid goes, "Hey, mister, you okay?" He's like, "Yeah, I've been fine. I'll get over it." It's like, "Want to play ball with me?" "Yeah, sure, kid. What's your name?" "Shaquille O'Neal."
And there's a black limo watching the entire thing. The window goes down ever so slightly, and we just see a dog with sunglasses, and I feel like there's something here.
See, the Chauncey joke I was gonna do was that at the award ceremony, like when instead of Don and the Sterling Cooper Don team, like even though they Chauncey is not announced, like he wins. And, like you see the announcer like, this is Chauncey's first nomination, first win at the CeeLos.
That's why Duck is so drunk and upset.
I mean, 50 categories and one of them being like a local commercial made for waxes under $2,000.
Oh, well,
there could be an award for it.
It was a national commercial.
There's nothing in the rule book that says a dog can't win a CeeLo.
That's right.
Or whatever it's called. Cleo, that's
Cleo,
right.
Yeah.
I love that they don't have speeches, by the way. That they just accept the award and then just
50
walk.
Awards.
I know, that's what I mean. It's just like boom, boom, boom. It's amazing.
Yeah, and well, I gotta say, so apparently they had a lot of problems trying to figure out what these awards were even like in the first, like in the 1960s, because they started in I think 1959, and apparently like everyone they talked to, they said it's such a drunken affair that no one remembers like what it was really like, because they were just too like that is like true to it. When
these take place during the day.
Yeah.
Okay, I was under the impression that this was at night, and then when they said that the Life cereal guys were there, it's like this is like mid-afternoon. Like, wow.
Yeah, it was like still light out. Yeah, it's like, let's pace ourselves, gentlemen. But yeah, so they didn't really know kind of what it was like. They said, like, I know I won, but like they weren't even sure if there were any speeches at all. Like no one remembered ever doing them. So they kind of just went with it the way that they did. And they also talked about, like, a typical show would have had, the dramatic question of like, will Dawn win the award? And that be the entire episode, right? But in true kind of Mad Men fashion, kind of like something like Nixon versus Kennedy, that's only part of the episode, and it's obviously not the real focus of the episode. It's more about the hangover of the whole thing. And yeah, I mean, we see this is Don at his rock bottom. Can he go any lower?
I'm sure he can.
I guess we'll see in the next episode if that's possible. I don't know. Not to give anything away. Ken is back. Aaron Staton, who plays Ken Cosgrove. Pete Campbell has his, dilettante with him, or whatever the term is. Staton was very quiet on the commentary. He's cracking jokes here and there, but he didn't talk too much about, coming back to the show or anything like that. But yeah, he is back, and the whole thing he has with Pete is obviously very tense. Pete is not happy about it, but in a similar Peggy fashion, he kind of does his move, right? To like assert his dominance over Ken Cosgrove. So I guess, Mike, what do you think? I mean, do you think that Pete plays this the right way? You know what I mean? Like not playing nice and kind of doing what he does here. Cause like there was a little bit of like Weiner kind of was saying in the commentary, he's like, I'm on Pete's side when it comes to like him and Lane, like this is wrong. Like that, Lane shouldn't have done this, but it is complicated, right? Because I also agree with Lane in the sense that like Pete can't keep doing this all by himself. Like he's been doing super well, but Roger's not really checking in. He's checked out, right? So what do you think?
I think Pete had the opportunity of like have grown in his career and as a person to accept like another person coming in, even if it's Ken, but like still assert himself as the like, not, I'm trying to think of a better word than just boss, but the person who is going to be over everything. But instead, he just kind of, I don't know, reverts to like slimy old Pete. And I feel like maybe like they could have had a new relationship, start off on a different foot, but no. Ken's coming in, he's like, okay, I guess this isn't the same Petey Campbell I'm going to get, and we'll see what happens from here.
I don't buy it when Lane says that he's fond of Pete. I just have this feeling that like it, because he's been so false the entire episode. But is that unpopular?
When Lane a liar? What?
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought? But was that your take, Will, or where were you at with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's always something about Pete where it's like, even when he's right, he's kind of wrong. Like, there's the idea of like it's true that he deserves some respect at this point. And I think throughout the season, he has, elevated himself, and like, especially like last episode with the Hyundai, or sorry, was it Honda? Or Hyundai? Sorry, Honda. The Honda deal. Like, he really, did the work and was like the adult in the room there as far as that goes. But yeah, I mean, this kind of, I don't know, it feels like almost like a weird sort of stepbrother relationship where it's like they have like the same father, but like they don't really get along. But then like, he's like, well, I want you two kids to have like a relationship in life, so I'm going to put you two together. And then like Pete's way of like establishing dominance is like, well, we're going to do things my way because this is my house. And Ken's like, okay, whatever, just kind of going with it. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it feels like a very faint way of kind of regaining control, but I think it's pretty clear that Pete kind of got the wind swept under him a little bit. That he kind of was demoted in spirit in some respects, and he's trying to regain that sense of control that he's tried to establish here to the best of his ability. But yeah, like most people in this episode, he is undermined.
If anything, though, I honestly think Ken, he looks really intimidated in that scene. And I do think, because he tries to brush it off. He's like, oh, I don't think anything's changed. But I think there is something about the way that Pete kind of, takes his clothes off the way that he does, metaphorically, kind of puts him at like unease, of feeling like, yeah, this is different. And he is the kind of person who I think he has changed at this point. Like he's not quite the Sterling Cooper, charismatic, bachelor without a cause kind of character he used to be. He's different now. He's about to get married and everything. And it just seems like more and more he is out of love with this profession, even more than he was before, to where I think it is a balance of like, he's like, all right, well, I'm not going to fuck with Pete because this guy is genuinely like, he's kind of freaking me out here. But also he's just like, I don't care enough. Right. It's like, this is just a job. And to people like Pete, Don, Peggy, like, it's not just a job. Like, this is their life. Like, this is all they have to hang their hats on.
That's why Ken's the best. I love Ken.
He gets it. He gets it. But no, Will still needs to be convinced. He's not, he's not a fan quite yet.
Will's always been more of a Harry Crane kind of guy.
Yeah. Harry Crane also has some moments in this episode.
I was saying he hasn't really been around all that much this season, but he's in this episode.
He's so busy on the West Coast.
I know. He's also talking about Emmys this time
reading
around.
Scripts.
Right, yeah.
Well, let's finish this out, I guess, with Roger. Roger is, and I think him ruminating on his life, that whole thing where Caroline, can't even say to his face of like, when he's like, why do you keep talking about my childhood? Weiner says it's because she doesn't want to say because he's narcissistic. I think that there's like a psychology thing there where it's like, because you have, some deep unseated issues that you need to talk to a therapist about. It's like very Freudian, but him thinking back, because he's trying to think of work stories, and that's what brings him to like never getting credit for finding Don. Like, that's his kind of running theme here, is that he feels like, this award's being given to Don, but Don wouldn't be there if it wasn't for him. But there's also the sense that like Don kind of like hired himself, and something that is debated in the, it's something that's kind of debated in the commentaries too, is, Weiner says that like, you can decide either way, like, did Roger really hire him when he was drunk? And in the other commentary, like Jake Ferguson firmly just like, all evidence points to that. I think that's the point. It's like the look on Don's face when they get into the elevator at the end of the episode says it all. But at the same time, then Roger still feels like, all right, well, it really follows his character of like inheriting things, he kind of inherits Don almost in a way, and he wants the credit for that sort of thing. And that's why his book isn't working, because like, how do you write a book about that? How do you write a book about like how to succeed in business when
without really trying?
Exactly.
I think that book has already been published.
What's he going to do?
I do think, well, two thoughts on that. One, I love the little musings we get of Roger writing his book. They're just kind of like tangents on Cinemaholics, where he's just kind of just like, I always like Charlie Chaplin. Laurel and Hardy, I don't know. Laurel was a little mean to Hardy. Like, it was just like stuff like that. And just like, I grew up in the suburbs. This like stuff like just this mundane sort of just conversations. Like you said, like it just like he's lived an interesting life, but he just doesn't really have like a book in him per se, which is true, I think, of most characters in Mad Men, except for Ken, your guy. But yeah, I do appreciate that. For one, with younger Don, this episode, there's like, he's on the border of being like, golly gee, like with John Hamm's performance, like, oh gosh, oh man, like, like he's laying on like a little thick, but like just enough to make the comedy work without it feeling false, I think.
Well, he's not really Don yet. Sure. It's clear that John Hamm is tapping into the Dick Whitman character more in that instance.
But yeah, their drunken charade was really fun. And I love the cutaway to it, where it's just like, it's 10 a.m. And even before he finished saying 10 a.m., you cut to them at the bar.
Smash cut.
Yeah, that was
He's
great.
at a jar of olives. He's in a jar of olives at this point. We get the nice little bit of lore where like Betty did the ad in the fur company for Don, and he says that like, oh, they let me do it. It's an interest of mine. And so that's apparently what he's been studying at night school. And I think it's interesting how, also, before I forget, apparently creating that whole thing, that ad with January Jones, like doing the fur thing, apparently was like a huge ordeal. It took a lot of time and effort to make that happen. But yeah, I really love the attention to detail they did to show us the 50s, like Roger's hair being a bit different, and his makeup
Don's
and his
suit.
skin color. Yeah, the way Don looks and acts, and then Joan, like straight up looks like Marilyn Monroe in this, much more so than when we see her in 1960 in the first season. So it's fun. It's fun going down memory lane.
I got that with. Did you say I was with Joan or with Betty?
With I'm talking about with Joan when
I was
we're
gonna
in
say,
the hotel room.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. For a second, I thought you said Betty, but yeah, no, I definitely got a heavy Marilyn Monroe vibe from Joan this episode, which I found very intriguing, considering how shaken up she was about Marilyn Monroe's death a couple seasons ago.
Yeah. So I like these scenes. I do think, and I've come across people who said like, I liked the mystery. I liked not seeing this sort of thing. And there have been other people who have said like, why, let's get a Don Draper prequel, like put it in the 50s. Like that obviously wouldn't work if they try to do like a Better Call Saul sort of thing, because I think the less we know, the better. And I just personally think like we get just enough here where it has a point and we don't see how he becomes Don Draper. That's still mysterious. We just sort of see that one last kind of puzzle piece of like, well, what really got him into Sterling Cooper itself?
Sure. Well, I mean,
But then
I was just gonna say it wouldn't even be Better Call Saul if we did a prequel of Don, because Saul Goodman isn't the main character of Breaking Bad. Like if you did a prequel of Breaking Bad, like him working for what's that company called? Forget what it is. Like it wouldn't matter. Like it's just like, yeah, we know what happens. Like what's interesting about Better Call Saul is that we don't know about Saul in outside of his work in Breaking Bad. Like we know everything we need to know about Don from the show because it's about Don Draper.
Well, I think that that's the interesting thing that the Winery brings this up, where he's like, I love stories like that, where like he's going to work for Sterling Cooper, but it's like the intrigue is like, well, how did it happen? I think there is something there. There's something to like, how does he go from Dick Whitman, who is like, enthusiastic about his marriage, who is like this golden boy, to, being this standoffish creative director who wins those awards we see on his wall. And I think, I don't know, there is something kind of interesting about that. But I agree with you that it wouldn't work. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difference between like actual real storytelling and like the exploitative crap we get these days in like an overly saturated like Marvel universe or like Young Sheldon. Like, let's just get as much as we can out of an IP that people like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this was just enough. And even like if the point is to see like how Dawn like got into Sterling Cooper, Weiner doesn't even actually answer the question because it is ambiguous. We don't know if he is lying to Roger saying that he hired him or if Roger did it drunk. Like, that's also like what's so good about it, is that it's a worse writer would have came in and it would have been the whole episode, just like it would have been the whole episode about the awards. It would have been definitive. Like, as soon as he says the like, you said welcome aboard, there'd be like a cutback to drunk Roger either doing it or not doing it. And so you like the audience knows for sure. And that's just like something I appreciate about Mad Men over and over again, is that it's not like, I don't know, spoon feeding audiences. I think Weiner is just very deliberate about the choices and the stories he tells outside of, I guess, Joan and Roger affair timelines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We don't need to see like Dawn's first real affair. How Freddie Rumsen taught Dawn how to drink, like stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, we can use our imaginations, and that's going to be better in that respect. So yeah, that basically goes through it. I didn't really have anything else here. There was one piece of trivia I thought was funny. There's a scene where Stan is throwing the pencils at the ceiling. Apparently, they couldn't find anybody who could do that while sitting down, so they had to use a little machine to like make the pencil go in. And I was like, funny. Oh, that's movie magic.
So there are two things I feel we need to address. And the first one, and this is quick, I want to talk a little bit more about the actual drunk pitch. Because I'm curious from your perspective, John, like my perception going into this was that like it was a disaster. Like that's kind of like what the meme sets me up to be. And that's why like when I'm getting ready to watch the scene, like I'm rubbing my hands like, oh boy. But like obviously it's clumsy, and like probably the most cringeworthy thing about it, other than the plagiarism, is like him butchering the light or the montage or the thing from the
wheel, carousel. Yeah, where he's like he's taking nostalgia and like kind of using it again. It worked for him so well back then, but yeah, what a far cry.
But I mean, outside of being like kind of ramshackle and like disheveled, it's not a terrible pitch. I was kind of surprised that it was like, considering and maybe it helped that they were also kind of drunk, but like it wasn't the like disaster of pitch that I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, especially because eat life by the bowlful. Like it's not bad. Like it's and his argument of like kids will see a big bowl of cereal and then they'll want it, and then the mom I think the downside of the pitch is that I don't think he leans heavy enough into like kids, like caring enough about like a big bowl of cereal. I think he's overestimating that. And I think that the client actually is kind of touching on something there where he's like, it's a little bit too smart. It's like it kind of leans more toward the adult than it does the kid. And I don't think Don really sees that because of course Don doesn't understand kids. He, doesn't even pick them up. But
So
yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up because, and this is the big moment I was waiting for, it's time for the Unfrosted takedown. This episode, the rest of the episode is going to be talking about Unfrosted and the cameo from Mad Men characters, Roger Sterling and Don Draper, because it is about this. I don't know. I think
I haven't seen it.
I did this perfectly. Okay. So I kept the dynamic the same. I have seen the whole movie. Mike saw the scene when it came out a while ago.
It's a reverse.
And John hasn't seen the film or the scene.
But so I was at a party and was playing in the background.
Right. Exactly. So I kept the dynamic perfect. So in the scene, Mike, did you want to kind of break it down if you remember?
Honestly, I don't remember it that well. I remember thinking it's not very good.
The dynamic continues.
Sure. In any case, so real quick, obviously the movie is about a fictional version of the making of the Pop-Tarts, which is from Kellogg, who becomes the centerpiece of this scene because they're going to Kellogg to try to sell Pop-Tarts. And the scene basically has the overlying joke of it is just basically that Don makes the pitch to sell Pop-Tarts too provocative and too adult. Like it's like women in lingerie and like so like in like French, like font and all this stuff. And they're like, no, this is for like children, and all this stuff. Anyway, not a great scene, but I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it because I'm not even going to get into the whole idea of like Unfrosted and Mad Men being canonical with one another because that just opens a whole can of worms that's like multiple podcast episodes worth of dissection. But I wanted to hear first from you, John, just kind of briefly, not watching the scene, just kind of hearing about it. What are your thoughts on both John Hamm and Roger Slattery reprising the roles for kind of a throwaway gag like this, and also how you feel about them using these characters well after the show is done?
I think it's kind of sad, honestly.
Well, sure, yeah. I think
I think that them having a little bit of fun, like I get it, but for this, it just seems a bit like for this,
Sure.
Like I feel for them because they probably just, I haven't seen the movie. I've heard it's pretty terrible. And
it's honestly, it's okay. I didn't think it was as bad as people are making it out to be.
Got it. Okay. Well, I heard it was pretty bad, but I can't say anything, obviously.
The Mad Men scene is not good. I will say that.
So, yeah, I mean, it's like, then why do it at all? That they owe a favor to Jerry Seinfeld? Like what?
Would like to defend the fact that it is like, it's for sure not canonical because it is never explicitly said that it's Don Draper and Roger. Like, they're like even credited. They're Adman 1 and 2. Like they're definitely
what they say.
Mike did his research. Yeah,
but
Mike did his research here.
They say that they're Mad Men or they're Ad Men from Madison Avenue. So it's pretty heavily implied that it's Mad Men.
But I think Mike's point stands.
Yeah, it's as close as you like. They are leaning on like a known persona. Like that's the joke, but they aren't actually them, right?
Isn't that the point of Unfrosted? Is that like there's personifications of brands, so it kind of fits that there'd be a personification of an ad man. And
sure,
I think Mike won the argument against you, Will.
Sure, but
congratulations, Mike.
But to answer your question, John, and I'm glad that you teed this off because this ties back to a seed that I planted earlier in the episode, which is that I think at the end of the day, John Hamm wants to be a comedic actor. So in this episode, in this cameo, he's kind of crossing the streams. Like he's taking his most dramatic, well-acclaimed role and placing it into a comedy, which I think is really fascinating. I think that's the reason why he did it, is that like he wants to kind of establish himself more as a comedic persona. And so like, what better way to do that for him than to kind of make fun of his Mad Men thing, which I think he's already done. Like he's done like SNL things as Don Draper, right?
His SNL work is pretty good. And yeah, it is funny that it's with Roger too. John Slattery is just a genuinely funny, hilarious person anyway. And so like he got to be kind of the comic relief in the show. So yeah, maybe John Hamm is kind of looking at that and being like, yeah, I wish I could, I wish I could do a Roger type role at some point.
Do the number 2, like in the scene, like cutting the tension.
Yeah,
I do have one quick thing to say about Jerry Seinfeld. Just everyone knows what how big of a scumbag Jerry Seinfeld is and stuff like that. But one personal anecdote: John and I have a common friend who's doing contract work. I don't even know if John knows this. That did contract work for Jerry Seinfeld. I won't even say what it was, but someone on his team had a lazy eye, and Jerry Seinfeld requested that person be taken off of the project because he couldn't handle seeing someone with a lazy eye.
Who does Jerry Seinfeld think he is? Jennifer Lopez?
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, I was trying to figure out the best way to incorporate conversation about Frosted in here because I felt like we'd be remiss as a Mad Men podcast not to discuss it.
You don't have to explain yourself, Ashton.
Anyway.
You nailed it.
Yeah, I'm so
fine.
Nothing has changed.
I am so glad that I was able to time that out perfectly and
Pop-Tarts,
keep
it's
the dynamic,
toasted.
And keep the dynamic of the show intact while discussing the film. I did it. All right, we can end this episode.
Thank you so much for listening to Mad Men. We'll see you on the next episode of The Suitcase. I think it'll be one to remember because even Will is aware of the fact that The Suitcase is one of the highest, if not the highest rated episodes of the entire show. But until then, we'll see you later.
Mike's coughing. Oh boy.
Yeah, he's just thinking about The Suitcase, has him losing it.
Sorry, guys.